Hey, it's Tim. This is Quantum Komposer, and in this video I will show you how to make harmonies by routing notes to your instruments via chords. If you haven't watched part 1 of this video called Making Chord Progressions, I strongly recommend watching that video before watching this one. I'll demonstrate first using a simple example with piano, and then later we'll do a fuller example with a range of synths. So once you have a chord progression, you can start routing notes to chords to trigger notes of the current chord and send those notes of the current chord to your instruments. Typically we'll use the notes device in Quantum Komposer to send notes to chords. Chords has 8 MIDI channels dedicated to transposing incoming notes to current chord notes. They're broken up into 2 categories: melody channels on MIDI channels 5, 6, 7 and 8, and harmony channels on MIDI channels 9, 10, 11 and 12. You can send notes into chords on any of these channels, 5 through 12, and chords will transpose the incoming notes based on the melody mode or the harmony mode set for that channel on that scene. And so let's first take a look at the harmony modes. We have 4 dials here, one for each of the channels, and if we turn these to off, we can rotate the dial to see what will be triggered. With the harmony modes, any note will trigger the output. The output is influenced by the octave of the note you send. So if you send a C2, it will trigger the output in octave 2. If you send a C3, it will trigger the output in octave 3. Other than that, the notes you send will determine the rhythm of the sequence, and the harmony mode will determine what notes of the current chord are sent out. So with a setting on bass, the harmony mode will always just send out the bass note of the chord. We can send out the root note, the third, the fifth and the seventh, which are the first, second, third and fourth notes of the chord respectively. We can send out the first and the fifth, also known as a power chord. We can send out the triad, the first, second and third notes of the chord. The tetrad, the first, third, fifth and seventh notes of the chord. We can send out the first and the fifth and the bass note, 0 representing the bass note, and we can send out the triad and the bass note. So let's have a look at how these work. First, we need to send up some notes into chords to make this work. So I'll grab my harmony notes instance to generate some notes. So to do this, let's change the rate from 16th notes down to half notes, and we'll put some notes in on the bar, like so. Now if I press play, we don't hear anything because the mode is currently set to off. And I should point out that I've set up my MIDI channels to send out on channels 9, 10, 11 and 12. So channel 1 will be sending out on channel 9, or the first lane in notes will be sending out on channel 9, and so I can use the first harmony mode here to set what gets sent out. So in my scenes, I've got a chord progression here, and trigger these chords, we're not hearing anything now because all of the harmony modes have been set to off. But if I come back here and set my harmony mode to the bass note and press play, we hear a bass note on the first beat of each bar. Let's change that to the root note of the chord. The third. The fifth. The seventh. Power chord. The triad. Tetrad. All four notes of the chord. First, the fifth, and the bass note. And the triad with the bass note. Okay, so let's bring this back down and just play the first and the fifth, the first and the third notes of the chord. And let's go to a new channel and we'll set the rate here also to half notes, and instead of having the notes on the beat, we'll have them on the off beat, like so. And we're not hearing anything on these notes until we set a harmony mode. So here, let's set this to the root note of the chord. And let's try the triad. All four notes of the chord. Okay, so now at the moment we're just locked to set the first chord. Let's play through the chord progression. So you can see how as we move through the chords, the notes that are triggered are different. So we've got some nice chords playing there. Let's open up another instance of notes. And these ones are set to come on 5, 6, 7 and 8. And these are going to go into the melody modes of chords. And the melody modes work in a similar way to the harmony modes, but slightly differently. They have mode types and dedicated channels, but the note that we send as well as the octave can influence the output. So for example, if we have a mode set to mode 2, the incoming notes will be rounded to the chord notes, and they get rounded in a way which is related to the MIDI input key scale. We have that set to C major, and that means that we will send the notes of the C major 7th chord in to trigger the melody modes. And as I pointed out in the overview in a previous video, the C triggers the root note, the E the 3rd, the G the 5th, and the B the 7th. So by sending in those notes, I can trigger the root, third, fifth and seventh of the chord. So with the modes off, nothing was sent through, so you can mute notes for a scene. Mode 1, which is chord, will only transpose the notes C, E, G and B. Any other notes will be ignored. Mode 2 is round to chord, so notes outside of C, E, G and B will be rounded to the nearest C, E, G, B note. The non-chord mode allows you to send any note, and notes that are sent in on the C, E, G and B notes will be transposed to chord notes as described already. Other notes will be transposed to a note near the chord note that you've sent in. So if you send in a C sharp, that note will be transposed to one semitone above the current chord root note. Then modes 4, 5 and 6 work a bit more like the harmony modes, where any note we send will be transposed to the bass, root or note, or the third or the fifth. And only the octave will influence the pitch of the note in terms of what we send through. And then lastly you have a mode number 8, which is through, so anything that you send will just go through without any form of transposition. So let's just keep it simple, and we'll have these set to round to chord, which means that anything we send in will be rounded to chord notes. Up here in our steps mode for channel 1, let's change the rate to eighths notes, and we'll do a couple of channels here, so we'll change them both. And now what we want to do is come to sequence generation, and we'll just generate some rhythm and maybe something like this maybe. We can tie a note in here like so, and if we press play now, okay, so we have this, and if we were to choose another channel and generate some rhythm, and we come here, we can also generate some melodies, and it's just changing the notes. So okay, so now we've got these notes, singular notes, interspersed between our chord notes that we set up with the harmony modes. And if we were to come back to the steps mode and change the length of this pattern, we can maybe just come back and generate something and change it slightly, and now we have a 14 step pattern, and we can, that means these notes will be moved around Okay, so now with our simple chord progression and some chords playing on the beat and in the offbeat with our harmony modes, and some melody modes being sent in, we get quite a nice articulated version of our chord progression. So now let's add in some context for this, and we'll add some ting. A bit of shaker. And so there you go, that's how you can use the notes device to send notes into chords and route them via the melody and the harmony channels to generate output to send to your instruments. That's all based around the current chord. Let's look at how we can use some of the melody modes with some synthesizers. So I've got on this instance of notes a 4-step pattern, and I've reduced the length down to 4 steps, and at the moment we can see that the melody modes are all set to 0, which means they're off. So we hear nothing except just a beat for reference, and we can put in some steps here, and we still hear nothing. If we turn up our melody mode to 1, which is chord, we start to hear a pattern, and the pattern is changing. The notes that are being played is changing because if we have a look at our chord progression, we're playing the root note of the chord in each case. So we're playing C, G, A and F. If we wanted to create a more traditional ARP, we could enable these other steps and go into the edit mode and change the note of these to C, E and G, and now we would be looking to hear the first note, then the second note, and then the third note of the chord, or the first, the third, the fifth, and then back to the root note of the chord. So you can hear that we have a more traditional style ARP there, but we're not limited to that, so we can change the pattern or the rhythm or the notes so with the melody mode off, we don't hear anything. Let's turn it to 1, melody mode 1. We just hear the notes of the chord. With melody mode set to 2, we're going to hear the same thing because it's round to chord. But if we come into the edit mode and change this note to a D, and we're hearing 2 C's. But if we increase the melody mode to number 3, the D and the C, because the D note is being rounded to two semitones above the root note of the chord. So as the chord changes, that D is changing in pitch also. Then if we change the melody mode again to bass, chord notes change to bass notes. And mode 5, now we're just hearing the root note. So regardless of the notes that we have, the chord notes C, E, G are being converted to the root note, and the D is ignored. In mode 6 we're hearing the third. On mode 8 we're in through mode, so we're just hearing the notes that are sent through. Let's increase the steps of this pattern to 8 and add in some extra notes, and we'll turn the melody mode back to 1. So now we're hearing these two D notes not played because they're not part of our C major chord notes. But if we transpose that to mode 3, round chord, we do hear them. So, you'll notice here on this last note, it's got been set to an octave higher. So let's just we can hear that the last note in this pattern is set to C4, so it's an octave higher. So we can influence the octave that is output by changing the octave in our melody sequence. To do this, we'll go to sequence generation and we'll select rhythm, and I'll generate a pattern, and we can edit that pattern too if we want to add some extra notes in. And then we'll go to the melody and we'll just change the melody notes. And you'll see that mostly what's generated is notes of the C, E, G and B, because these are our chord notes and they're the ones that will get converted to the notes of the current chord. So we can't hear anything because the melody mode for this channel is set to 0. So let's turn the melody mode to 1, chord. Okay, so that's not bad. How about we want to focus now more on our melody. So let's change the melody mode of the bass line from 3 up to 5, so it just sticks on the root. And let's if we come into the edit mode and change the pitch of this note, change the melody mode to round a chord, we still don't hear anything because the round a chord only rounds scale notes. So we change this to an F. We hear the scale note being rounded to one semitone below the G, which is, two semitones below the G, which is an F. If we change the mode to non-chord, mode 3, then we can, let's try an F sharp. And now the F sharp is being played, and it's being rounded to one semitone below the fifth or the G. So in this way we can use the modes to effectively change how our melodies sound, and you can do this on a per scene basis. So now let's change the melody mode of this to the fifth by changing it to melody mode 7. And if we turn the melody mode to our bass back to 2, round to chord, we can put the focus back, the melodic focus back on the bass line, and leave a rhythmic focus on the lead sound. Okay, and let's just go back to a root note bass line for the bass, and we'll change this back to 3, round to chord for the lead. Okay, so that's how you can use the melody modes to influence the sounds that you hear in each scene. This video turned out to be a little bit longer than expected, so I've decided to split it into 2 parts. So be sure to check out part 2 of this video, Making Harmonies, where we will explore the harmony modes. I'll see you in the next one.